recording. We'll share that on YouTube when it's ready. Post your questions for Michael and Cruce in the chat, and we will we'll queue those up and share them when they've finished speaking. And if you have any resources or anything you'd like to share, please feel free to do that in the chat as well. All right, without further ado, please welcome Cruce Saunders and Michael Andrews. Cruce is a founder and principal at Simple A, which is a content intelligence service. He has spent more than 20 years focused on content technology and content engineering. And today, Cruce and his Simple A, team work alongside some of the industry's most innovative content leaders on small and large transformation programs. He publishes at simpleA.com. I'll put a link to that in the chat as well. Hosts the Toward a Smarter World podcast. Definitely suggest checking that out. It's a great way to learn about these topics. And a YouTube series called The Invisible World of Content. Michael Andrews, currently an independent content strategist. His special focus is on content architecture and content models. He has a blog called Story Needle, which again, we'll put a link to in the chat, and you can connect with him on LinkedIn, of course, too. So please join me in welcoming Cruce and Michael.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Paula.
Hi, everyone. All right. So I think I'm going to be starting this. So let me see if I can get the screen sharing here.
Yeah, and this is one of the most challenging and fun topics, getting design together with content and getting them together in a structured, interoperable, composable way, and starting simple. So.
All right, so everyone can see my screen? Give me a nod if that's the case.
Yep, we're good, Michael.
Fabulous. All right, so Cruce and I are going to be talking about structured content in the context of content design, or maybe if you've been working in the field a longer time, you might have talked about interaction design in the past and how content fit into that. And I'm going to talk for maybe the first 20 minutes or so, and then hand it over to Cruce, and he'll also be talking about this topic. We're going to be covering a lot of details here, and I just want everyone not to worry about us kind of racing through these things, because not only will there be the recording, as Paula said, but we'll make the slides available to everyone. So if you want to go back and sort of go through this detail later, you'll have an opportunity to do that. So talking about structure in the context of content design, it tends to evoke sort of different ideas among people, because you can think about structure in a couple of different ways. One type of structure is the structure of the user interface. And a lot of user interface is structured in terms of something might be called blocks. This is a term that a lot of people use. So this screen that we're looking at here is from a design style guide for a major German auto company, and they have their screens divided into blocks, and they think about where different blocks are and what those blocks are about, and they represent these things in terms of layout. So that's one way to think about structure in terms of the UI structure. But what I'm going to be talking about more is thinking about content structure. And this is a little bit different than thinking about UI structure, because we're thinking about the content first. So we're thinking about what it is we're going to write, what we're going to communicate, before we worry about the layout. So just as an example, if you are a writer for the New York Times, say, you're not worrying about how what you write is going to appear in a layout. You're just thinking about what it is you're going to write, and the layout takes care of itself. And that's really what having a content-first approach is about, is thinking from the start about what it is you want to communicate, the information and the messages. And this is really important because we often make the mistake of thinking about how something appears as defining what it is we need to say. And I think especially for folks who maybe are used to working in an environment like Figma, you are thinking about that layout and how what you need to say fits in that layout before you're thinking about what it is you need to communicate. But there are ways of getting around this. And really having a structure for your content is the way to avoid being trapped by thinking about the layout before the content. So this really gets into the sequencing of things. So we have a UI first approach where you're deciding the layout and then you decide the information and messages. And as I said, often when you're deep involved with a tool like Figma, this is what you are doing. You're thinking about the layout ahead of the messages and the information. But if you do a content first approach, you are thinking about the messages and the information and only then think about the layout. So this sounds pretty simple. You have these two approaches here, but how is it that you actually do this? Well, what we would need to do is separate out these different structures, because they often so often get kind of commingled and confused together. The UI first approach, when you're thinking about these blocks, you're really thinking about these specific UI elements or widgets. Think about banners or tooltips or things like that, buttons. What are you going to say on those buttons? But if you're doing a content first approach, you're thinking less about how to present things, but what to present and why you need to say it. And when you do that, you think more about how, what is the intent behind things and how do we label what it is we want to communicate. And having these labels captures the intent behind what it is we want to communicate. And this is really important because a button really doesn't tell us the intent. But if we say, it's something there to confirm something or to reject something, that tells us the intent. And so getting clear on the intent of all the pieces of content that we are creating is very powerful. And it lets us do things much more flexibly than if we only think about how it appears in the specific context of a user interface. Now, if you've ever worked on content for a product, say, a complex app for an enterprise, you're probably aware that there are thousands of strings associated with that product. And they keep, every time you do a new release of that product, you keep getting more and more strings, and it becomes kind of a mess. And these strings all need organizing. And the way we can organize these strings is by having a content model. And I'm sure a lot of people have heard the term content models. Some of you have used content models in your work. But what I have found in my work over many years across UX and content both is that content models are not used very frequently when it comes to product content, content supporting apps. And this is what I think is kind of a gap currently, is that we have some people who are familiar with content models as they support things like web pages, and other people are used to doing content design for apps, but we don't yet have that many people using content models to support interactive content that would appear in an app. And so this is an opportunity for us to get more deliberate with how we are developing content for apps by using a content model. We have all these strings, we need to organize them, and we organize them by labeling them. That label, again, is what the intent is for that piece of information or that message that we're trying to communicate. So having these labels, even though these labels may not be appearing on the user interface, but having these labels is very important for us as a team to be able to manage what these pieces of content are. And labeling these things is really what structuring is about. It provides a number of benefits. We can be more consistent with what we're communicating. We can reuse pieces of information or messages. We can help everyone just get started much faster, whether you're the end consumer who's seeing this, you have that intent very clearly communicated there, and you are able to understand things more quickly. Or if you're part of an internal team and you understand how the piece that you're working on fits into this bigger whole. And the labels are really, think about them as like fields in a database. And when we have each of these pieces of content, whether information or messages, tagged with very specific labels, then we can do a lot of experimentation with these things and figure out what works best. And then importantly too, these labels help make the content more interactive. So a lot of times we think about what needs to appear on the screen, but what people really want to have is the ability to interact with that content. They don't want to see everything all at once. They want to just see the pieces that are going to make sense for them at a point in time. And then they may want to see more or less as they're working through some tasks that they're doing. And we have the ability to scale up or down the detail, change the details when we have these labels for the specific pieces there that we're working with. So all of this bit of structuring really helps improve the experience for users. And what it does is it breaks us free of a lot of ad hoc design. So I think a lot of folks who are designing content today, especially if they're using a tool like Figma, they may have a kind of a short sprint that they need to work on, and they have a few screens they need to flesh out for the project sprint, and they do a good job developing these things, and then they move on to something else, and maybe another team picks up the next sprint. And there's a lot of ad hoc design going on here, but there's no sort of central plan for how all these pieces fit together. And really, in most apps now, you may have dozens and dozens of different flows that happen. And you might have, hundreds of screens associated with the app. And we need to have some way of having a central structure that explains how these pieces fit together, and make sure that we're not doing things in different ways at different times when we want to make sure that all these things are being done in a consistent way. So consistency is one of the things we can do, achieve with structure. We can decide what needs to be persistent. So if you're moving through a flow of things, sometimes you want to make sure that you're always showing this same information, the same message as you go through a flow, and keep it there so people have it at top of mind. Other times you're going to be scaling these things back and changing what you show. So a lot of you may have heard the term progressive disclosure, where you're changing the details as you move through something. So the model there allows you to change the amount of detail to match what makes sense for the user at a given point in time. Now, everyone wants to do this already, but when you are just designing things on a screen-by-screen basis, you may not be really thinking about these bigger picture issues about what it is you need to be showing at different points in time and how you regulate that detail for people. The model will allow you to do this. So content structure really is essential to interactivity. And this is something that, again, I don't think gets talked about as much as it should. The relationship between the structure of content and the interaction with content. And I think about structure in sort of two dimensions. One is what I call micro interactions. And these are things where you're maybe looking at a specific screen and you're doing some minor thing on that one screen, where you're making some small adjustment, a check-in or changing a setting or something like that. That's one kind of way structure supports interaction. The other way that structure supports interaction is for kind of bigger tasks where you're actually asking users to make a commitment of some sort. You're saying, all right, here's something we have available for you, and we would like you to take an action. But to get from A to B, you need to present a number of different steps. And the structure can help support guiding someone through those steps so that they make a commitment to an action that they understand and feel comfortable with. So this is very important to think about the structure in the context of tasks. And to do that, we want to think about structure not just as it relates to a topic, which is kind of frozen in time, all the things you might be able to say about a particular topic, much like an encyclopedia article, but we want to think about structure as it relates to time. And time is centered around actions. And so much of what content design is about is encouraging people to take an action that is going to be in their interest. So we focus on the action. We think a lot about the text on a button, say, a call to action, which is great. And then you think about all the things that need to be communicated before someone is comfortable taking a particular action. It needs to be around instructions, explanations, options, statuses, things like that. And each of those dimensions has structure to them. We can really break these things down and say, what specifically do we need to say as it relates to the status? What kind of things do we need to say as it relates to options or instructions? And we frame the action that someone wants to take. And if they take the action, we still need to communicate to them things after the action's happened. They still need to see what the status is now that they've taken the action. What options do they have after they've taken the action? And again, structure comes into play. So structure has a temporal dimension to it that, again, I don't think we often are thinking enough about, but it's very, very important. So where do we come up with this structure? I mean, particularly as it relates to task. And I find a lot of people maybe aren't necessarily sure how to go about doing this conceptually. So I just want to kind of at a very simple level break down what's involved here. So a task is associated with a goal. I mean, that's why we do tasks, because we have a goal in mind. And we do a task in relationship to some pursuit of some sort. And then we need to think about what information and messages we need to show. These you can think of as fields in a database. Who, what, where, when, how, why all these things are fields. And we can take any task and break these things into the essential information and messages we need to show. So that's great. Conceptually, we have an idea of what it is we need to communicate. Now, the important point I'm raising here is a lot of this may seem like common sense to you, and if that's the case, I'm very glad it is. But I'm not designing any screens yet. I'm not laying out any screens. We're just thinking about what it is we need to communicate to someone independent of any screen. And this is what Content First is about. We're not having to wait on the screens to be designed. We're not having to wait on widgets to be in place. So we think about the elements that we need to communicate, the information, the messages, and then we have to think a little deeper about them. You know, the parameters is what I call them. You know, so what's mandatory? What's optional? What's going to be default? What's allowed? What's predefined? What limits are around these things? What kinds of conditions are involved with whether or not things are there? Any kind of metadata as far as, you know, guidelines about stuff, or, you know, particular differences and things. These parameters get very complex, because that's when you start finding, when you lay things out, that the content starts shifting on you. And it really depends on the context. It depends on the path flow of how someone arrives at information, who they are, you know, all those sorts of things. So we want to be thinking about these things, and we can do that, again, before we even worry about the layout of things. But wait, there's actually more to it. I mean, there's a lot of variation here. And this variation often does not show up on a screen when you're just designing content on a screen-by-screen basis in an ad hoc way. We need to think about how different screens will show content in different ways. I mean, you have big screens, small screens, things like that. And that's going to change how you maybe have to offer content. We need to think about the timing, going back to the temporal element. So, you know, the first time versus the last time you show something. A lot of things about the states of things, you know, whether something is happening in the future or is past when it's supposed to happen. And then all kinds of variations around locale and language, of course. These are all lots of details. Now, the beauty of a content model is we can accommodate the planning of all these details by having a content model. We can anticipate that we're going to need all this and start planning for it, again, before we worry about how it is presented. And by preparing ahead of time, we actually are going to make the layout much more robust, because we've already thought through these dimensions ahead of time. One of the types of structure that I've been thinking about lately, because it's coming from a project I've been working on recently, is what I call microstructures. And these are text patterns in the values that we are creating. And we can think about these microstructures as being of maybe 5 different types. So we have certain types of fixed text that is always consistent. We've locked that down. We have some variable text where we may have like several options that we might present depending upon the situation. We have dynamic values where maybe it's just coming from a database, and you know, you're showing the most up-to-date information about something. You might find this a lot, say, in a context like e-commerce. There are user-generated values where people, the users themselves are submitting the information, you know, often in the context of self-service. And then there's some hybrid text values where we're combining some fixed text with some variable text. And this is really, really powerful when you are trying to come up with some very customized messaging for people. So structure can be very granular like this, or it can be very broad as well. I mentioned at the outset that content structure is different from UI structure. Now, ultimately, they do need to talk to one another. I think it's important to keep them separate because they have different roles, but by keeping them separate, we can manage them independently, but then we think about how we can map them to one another. So in a content model, which is the overarching way we structure content, even in the case of interactive content, this is being defined by what are called content types. And these content types are really how we define all the communications associated with a particular intent or some problem we're trying to solve. We can break these content types down into sections, which are sort of chunks of content, and then even break down those sections into smaller pieces, these microstructures I just mentioned before. The user interface has its own structure. So user interfaces often are defined with templates, which define the overall layout of a screen. And then the templates themselves can be broken down into what you might call UI widgets. And these often are the individual pieces that you would find, say, in a design system, the buttons or the cards or all those elements that you find in a design system. The important thing I want to communicate to you is that the sections are really part of something that would appear on a screen. So the templates themselves may be aligned to what appears on a screen. A content type is something that would appear across multiple screens typically. And the sections and the UI widgets that might present content are not necessarily the same thing. And this is something that I think a lot of people find confusing. They tend to think that they can structure the content entirely according to where it's being presented. And that isn't always a valid way to look at things, because you'll find that the content you have created can be presented in many ways. And in fact, that user interface is going to get revised again and again over time and change. So you want to have some stability in defining what information and messages you need to communicate and have it independent of how it is presented. Another thing I just want to mention is that structure in products, the content, it goes across multiple products often. So there's a lot of things like, account functionality or application functionality or some business processes that are shared across multiple products. So if you work in a really large organization that has many products that are released to customers, you have an opportunity actually to make some of this stuff common functionality, and that's going to really improve the experience for people and also the efficiency of what your team does. Now, that doesn't mean that you won't have unique product content for different products, and you still have the ability to use structure to define that. But this allows you to reuse things that are going to be useful for many products, as well as more closely manage the things that you are designing yourself. So a little bit about the implementation of this, and Cruce is going to go into a little bit more detail about this, but what we want to do is think about connecting the structured content to the different widgets in which it may appear. And a lot of this is about understanding the distinction between, on a technical level, the front end in which content is being displayed, basically the UI, and the back end where the content is being managed. And increasingly that's in a content management system of some kind, often now a headless content management system. Now, these are different ends of really the same thing, but we sometimes have this fence between the two sides, and we think that that we as content people don't understand the back end there or whatever. And I just want to encourage people not to be afraid of getting interested in how the content is getting managed, because when you understand more about it, you really do have a lot more leverage over what can be done with that. If we think about this content model I'm talking about, that would be represented here in the center of this diagram. And we can map those pieces of content, the information pieces, the messages, to different user interfaces. And that's represented by these dotted lines. And what this does is it allows us to not have our content locked into a particular presentation. We realize then that that content can be displayed in many places in many ways. And the reality is that the designs in which that content appears are going to change all the time. They're going to change, in fact, much more frequently than the content itself changes. So having this, what they call decoupling between the content and the layout presentation, is actually going to make the content more robust. So by having the content in a content model, we have a central place that all the content, no matter where it appears, is organized in one place. And we can use that to develop new content, to manage existing content, and to update content when it's needed. I think one thing I just want to close with is that we're talking here a lot about modularity. And maybe some folks have heard about thinking about content as Legos or thinking about design as Legos. And I think it's a powerful metaphor, but I don't know that everyone always takes away the big lesson about why Legos are so interesting as a metaphor, but we don't really seem to have Lego-like content and design. And the reason is that we often are still building single-use content. And Legos aren't meant to be single-use, right? You can build something and then pull it apart and build something else. And that's really what we need to be able to do with our content. So we can't glue it together in a very specific way where you can't do something more with it. And Legos aren't like an IKEA piece of furniture. We think about an IKEA piece of furniture, sure, you have pieces there, you assemble them together, but if I need to move, I can't just disassemble that item and move it very easily. It's kind of, once you build it, you're sort of have to keep it, or else it's not going to hold together. So I wrote about this recently. If you're interested, you can read it on my blog, Story Neil. But it's just something to keep in mind about that ability to take something apart as well as to put it together. So plan your content around journeys. Think about structuring your content, break it down according to what people are going to need at different times, and be able to modulate the amount of detail accordingly. Just a couple of things here. Recommended readings, again, we'll provide the slides here so you can get these details. I showed one slide here from a fellow I just learned about a few weeks ago named Wolfram Nagel, who writes about a lot of these same things I'm talking about, but from a UI perspective. And so I just wanted to share that for anyone who is trying to make a connection with their colleagues who do UI work, because I think this guy has some interesting ways of talking about it. And with that, I'm going to pass this back over to Cruce, and he will carry on.
Great, thank you, Michael. And there's some really great chewy questions that are being asked in the chat. So thanks for everybody that's chiming in on that. I'm wondering if anybody uses or works with teams that use Figma within their content and UX design cycles. So in that question in chat, just maybe raise your hand on that or thumbs up. Yeah, John's got a thumb up on that. So it's interesting to see how many folks are involved in content design life cycles that deal with Figma. Figma's interesting because there is a long pedigree of design system interactions. Here's Sandy and Ariel, thank you. Yeah, there's a long system of a long history of design systems using Figma as a destination for essentially modular approaches to design. And what Michael was reviewing is all the hows and whys of what modular content looks like within the user journey from a content first standpoint. And once that exists, how do you get that together with modular design? So there's a lot of design systems. I think anybody using Figma is probably also have some sort of design system project in the works or running in their organizations. Design systems in general are taking a systematic way of seeing design for reusability and composability and instituting it within a governance framework, within a orchestration approach, often within a system of record, so that design set of tooling can be integrated to the way that folks are building their user experiences, their different UIs, using these common elements. So what I'm going to talk about next, and let's do this as a slideshow, hopefully everybody can see that, is how we get composable content into action inside of an enterprise, and how we get that into relationship with design systems. So we're going to take a look at some of the barriers to composable content, why it's not happening today. And then we'll take a look at some of the ways around those barriers, and then the way that we can sort of funnel into a way to get started, and then what a life cycle of an implementation project kind of looks like. And then we'll also start looking at some tools, and specifically a template that we'll walk through that you can download if you'd like and use as a place to get started. For a long time within the structured content world, we've talked about the concepts behind content modeling. There's some really great panels we've done this last year with Nas and folks on Omnichannel X on content modeling. And there's some really good material that we published that others have published. Of course, Carrie Hain and Mike Atherton have a great book about it. We'll talk about that under resources, and there's other authors that have been addressing content modeling at some depth, and Michael in his blog certainly does as well. That's all wonderful, but the problem is we found that many organizations are doing grassroots work in order to get component-based content off the ground, and usually building a larger scale content model that's cross-functional is an unusual starting place. We have clients that have built those, and we've built some huge ones for more top-down engagements with transformation initiatives. But really, from a content design perspective, there are things to do to move the ball forward towards component-based content that is reusable. And the goal for this talk today is to make it as practical as possible to get started from a grassroots level. So let's talk about some of these barriers to composable content, to getting content structures into production. So one is this: there's no budget, there's no internal support, and so everybody's just out there focused on a limited output format. There's another one there where it's get the website relaunched, or somebody's decided, hey, let's replatform. So now we're replatforming to a headless system, which is awesome, but nobody's done any of the architecture for the content structures, and so they're just kind of lifting and shifting the old stuff into this new platform that has an API. So it's old stuff, but exposed in a chunky way via API. So it's not actually reusable in the ways that Michael was talking about. So the other thing is that internal partners don't get it. Let's say you build a content model, or you build a basic set of content elements for reusing, for example, some common elements for an offers project. But then you don't have the interface folks working with the same kinds of heuristics in mind about how to structure those outputs, so you can get the design componentized, but that doesn't necessarily work with componentized, or you can get content componentized, but it's not working with componentized design in an interoperable way. And then there's lack of tools. So how do we build these models, share them? How do we get these different elements into a system? The design system folks have sorted this out largely, but not us on the content side. So we're really interested in that. How do we advance the state of the art of what it is to integrate component content into design systems at a very practical level? So here's some ways to get past the barriers. Number one is, start small. So adding structure to a single project and a single team first. And we'll look at that when we look at the funnel as well. What is a good way to begin to narrow a scope that will allow you to demonstrate the value of component content in action? And then, two is internal marketing. Really, no matter how good the models, the component structure is, it has to be sold in to the other folks that are working on it. So there is kind of like an internal marketing effort that goes along with any of these initiatives. If you're going to build a spreadsheet, build a way to market the spreadsheet with folks. And that could be lunch and learns. It could be an email update. It could be a sponsored with your department doing a kind of organization-wide sort of tour, and bringing the message around, bringing it into company events. A lot of different approaches to this. We've seen clients put up posters and other kinds of things as well, and help build these marketing programs, internal marketing programs. And then the other thing is, if you don't have budget, start free and cheap. We used to really kind of talk about spreadsheets as passé in a way, that we want to move more towards object-oriented content modeling approaches. And we build tooling in that regard. But what we found is that we really need to just be able to start with something that everybody has, that's simple, that's portable, and the good old spreadsheet is a way to do it. And then use that to move into plugins, especially things that plug into Figma. But you can also have things that plug into your content management system as well. So that way you can operationalize your content structures so that they become more visible to people. So they are, I believe I saw somebody asking about, are content models representational or abstract? They're abstract at the highest level, but they should take the form of artifacts, and that's really how they become visible. And so we'll talk about some of the artifacts and the ways that content models express themselves. And we're going to talk about tokenizing content models, and specifically doing so in a way that allows them to be available kind of just to the people that need those particular parts of your model. So that way it's not just one big content model that you're asking people to absorb, but they can start to absorb just the pieces they need for their project, their part of the website, their channel that they're working with. And then it's, build support by sharing, start small and then share with others and then grow from there. I really liked this quote from a talk that Haley Hughes gave last year, Thinking Big and Small. So she said that there's periods in your career when no matter what you say, people just don't get anything related to systems in general. They're just not going to get it. But there's going to be other times when you have incredible advocates who not only get systems, but they invest in you and your team and your efforts. So there is some peace in knowing that this is a cycle. And I liked the zen of this quote. It's keep working to advance the state of the art. Know that there's going to be times that people support what you're doing and get it. There's going to be other times that they don't, and so you just kind of keep plugging away. All right, so let's look at this composable content focus funnel as a way to look at how to get started, where to begin. First of all, pick a content domain. So what is the overall domain that you want to operate within? So this could be a broad domain like post-sales support content, or pre-sales marketing content to get people to conversion moments. It's really within that content. As you're looking at customer journeys, there's content performing functions for a given domain within those journeys, or within the larger corpora of content at the enterprise. Choose one, and then within that, choose at least a content type. Sometimes pilots are fine with 2 or 3, but don't go crazy, because the wider your aperture, the harder it is to narrow everybody's attention through to completions, to production releases, or at least to releases into pilot stage. And so you want to get that narrow focus on something that is communicable easily. Then choose the views. What are the outputs? What are the ways that you want to represent the content? And then if you have a design system, get specific with, what components, what design components. Are we working with the carousel, or what are we working with? And then all the way down to defining a pilot, who's the team and how they're going to work on it. And then fade in an approach to working with composable content, types that can be put into a pilot that you can expand, prove value, expand further, incorporate more participants, and then bring into production rollouts and iterate. And then from there, build up a dedicated function and engage more pilots that are ancillary until you're building a content system ultimately. So we talked about content models, but we want to decompose content models further. And so I'd like to introduce a concept called content tokens. In the design system world, there's something called design system tokens. And a design system token is basically a way to define a design dimension in a form that can be easily accessed for reuse. So these are transportable. In some cases, they're just CSS classes that are stored in config files. There's a lot of ways that design system tokens get stored and incorporated into code, but they're basically reusable. Definitions for standardized colors or typography or spaces or borders, cell padding and this kind of thing. And how forms get laid out and icons are used and grids and what the accessibility is. All of that is a way to componentize design. So content system tokens are ways to define different content dimensions in forms that can be easily accessed for reuse and orchestration. And anyone used to content modeling will notice that what we're doing with content system tokens is just decomposing the content model into parts that then can be reused as independent pieces. These are essentially, everything from the content types within a domain, the elements within content types and the attributes, collections, which are groupings. For example, all the elements that are used in a promo carousel, or all the elements used in a resource center or a social media item. So all of those things, can get put into an encapsulated form in the beginning in a spreadsheet, right? And that it can be considered tokens, which are reusable parts of content that then have actual content associated with it. So to make that real, to make this make sense, we're going to talk about how these manifest. So, and then we're going to look at them in an example spreadsheet. So content tokens can manifest in a lot of different ways. One is in a content model spreadsheet. It could also be in a content modeling tool. We use one called Core Models. Can also be used in a CMS, content management system. Those are just the form fields that you have in your CMS, right? It's the schemas that run that CMS behind the scenes. So that is also a way that content model in its full form manifests, but it might actually just be, separate subsets of the model, which are in different spaces. So all of that is then rendered to a channel, and those content tokens are actually appearing in different places. The title is appearing here, and then the summary is appearing, and there's a caption appearing here. Those are all different tokens of content that are being reused, right? A component form of content that is tied back to a system, right? Which is ultimately the larger content model that is orchestrating the structured content in these different forms, including to the code, right? Whether that's XML or JSON or whatever is or CSS that is representing those elements of your content in code. So all of those are different places where content tokens materialize. The spreadsheet, right here, you've got these are all different kinds of tokens: search, description, title, summary, caption. The content model tools, where you see it, where they're mapped and you're describing them and connecting them with other standards like schema.org. And then you're mapping from your CMS to other systems. So whatever those systems are, they're all incorporating these same sort of tokens in different places, in different representations. Same thing with semantic, the coding and the channels. So let's look at what a template for content tokens definitions looks like. So this is a very simple spreadsheet. We've created this as a free download, and basically the idea for this template is it's an example of a way to take content types. In this case, we've got article, event, video, white paper, person, right? These are all types along with some various elements. And so all of that is now inside of a spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet's pretty easy to use. So you can take your, let's say your catalog list or your article type, and then you can add in your description here. So this is cool because content designers can just easily plug in, sort of content from a content first approach into here without having anything actually built out. Or they can begin to take somebody's designed something inside of Figma, and they can begin to start turning it into something that the data folks can use. So either way, content designers, whether they're starting with the presentation that somebody's mocked up and now they have to decompose it into a set of tokens, they can do that in the spreadsheet, or they can start, like Michael is recommending, with a content first approach, and then build the journeys and build the content elements and then provide them in here. And then we'll show you how we can connect this into Figma. So whether either way you're starting, you can meet inside of this kind of spreadsheet and then have people edit it. And it's a Google Sheet. It's pretty easy then to collaborate on it and whatnot, and to create relationships between different types. We do this in a fancy tool called Core Models, but you can also just do it in a spreadsheet. And these things all can include things like assets like display images and whatnot. And if you'd like to take a look at the spreadsheet, just take a look at simplea.com. We've got it there for download. And then that can be plugged into Figma. So let's talk about what that would look like. Once you've got your content tokens and they're defined and you're ready to start reusing your content, now you want to be able to get it actually working inside with the rest of your design tools. So here we're going to just take a look really briefly at this plugin. The plugin is free for use with the spreadsheets. And if you've got Contentful or another system, it's got there's a way to license it for enterprise. But for using it with the spreadsheet and just getting anything you need to going, you can drag in your elements directly from your spreadsheet and in your design. So just like the component-based designers have design systems with these little system trays where they're able to pull in a carousel, a widget, a promo box, or whatever. Now you can drag and drop straight out of your spreadsheet, but in Figma, all of your structured content components. So you can drag your actual live content item examples, or you can do the fields only, for example, and just bring in the field names like title and headline and design in this abstract way and show people, here's how this stuff is reused. And what's cool about it is once it's tied back to the data source, when you update the data source, it updates your, on refresh, it'll update your Figma file. So that way you can do lots of different variations of your content, and you can you can build one prototype and then show lots of different variations of the content. And you can start working towards composable content in a very practical way. So this is one of the ways we're really working to get these component-based content approaches made practical. All right. So you can get started pretty easily here by downloading the template spreadsheet, syncing it to real content for Figma, playing around with it. It's free to use forever for both of these with a spreadsheet. So it's a good thing for content designers who are wanting to grassroots begin the conversation about structured content and what content tokens are and how that can reuse towards the systems and build towards really truly more interoperable content models. We're a big fan of the bigger picture, which is putting together content services organizations with dedicated content engineer and content operations and content strategy folks. And we've done that with some large organizations and gotten these running and done transformation work. But we found that that's like a very small percentage of the market. The largest percentage of the market are people who are working grassroots up on projects. And so we really want to make sure that we're able to bring everybody towards more composable content technologies. And it's happening slowly, but surely it's happening. So in terms of trends, there really is a lot more tools that support component-based authoring. a lot of component content management systems, but also digital asset management, product information management. A lot of CMSs have APIs now. The whole headless revolution has been very successful, and Mach, the Mach Alliance has moved a lot of architectures towards composability. So there is a lot of tooling out there that supports exactly what Michael and I have been talking about today. These things the industry have talked about for a long time, but now the tools support it. And as we move more towards AI and generative systems, we believe that the need for structure is actually going to be even greater than ever before. And so that we're going to need to be able to provide these structures to the AIs, and we'll need to be able to do that in a way that's reusable and object oriented. And so the work you're doing now is laying the future groundwork for working with content and AI at a more scalable level. And that's its own discussion, but just rest assured that this is in line with something that we believe is and we've seen so far to be very, very durable, even in the advent of generative AI systems. We mentioned Carrie and Mike's book, Designing Connected Content. That's a great place to get started. Atomic design is talked about the same thing in the design world for a long time, and the heuristics in this book are, and the articles about it are really good. And then there's Michael's blog, Story Needle, which is great. Check out the Mach Alliance if you're interested in architecture, microservices, API first, cloud native. This is all part of the trend towards composability that we're talking about. And composable systems is something Gartner and others have talked about in depth. They've got some material out there about the future of business as composable. And if you're interested in enterprise content models, there's something called the core content model. This is different. It's come to my attention. There's another system called the core model, which is a content planning tool. This is about enterprise grade content models that interoperate across groups and systems and teams and devices and platforms. So this is when you kind of go into this sort of more advanced enterprise kind of conversation about modeling, that's the next step, is the core content model. All right, so that is the presentation side of the conversation, and now I'm sure we've got a lot of questions to get to and some good discussion. I would love to hear some really cool conversation come out of this today. We've got such a smart group with us today. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Michael and Cruce. Obviously, everyone, lots of great questions, as you say. Thanks for sharing all these great resources. I'm going to throw it over to Ariel to ask her to kind of queue up and present these questions to you, and we'll work through as many as we can in the time we have left, and appreciate everyone's participation here. This is awesome to see everybody's great questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for this lively and wonderful. This is such a passion area for me. So I've been wrapped the whole time. So thank you both for coming and presenting to us. Early on in the presentation, Sandy Markle wanted to know about kind of how can content designers help UX designers identify and overcome the potential red flags associated with a UI first structure. So what are some of the compelling reasons and benefits you can highlight to convince them to consider to adopt a content first approach instead of coming from this UI first or this visual first approach?
Yeah, I'll take a start at that, and maybe Cruce has some thoughts as well. But what we're doing is empowering the content folks to be content first. We're not telling the UI folks to wait on the content folks. And so well, I use the word decoupling. We're separating the content work from the UI design work. And that means that we don't have this dependency where one party is waiting for the other party to figure something out. So as far as the UI folks are concerned, they're still UI first. I'm just saying from a content point of view, we're being content first. We're thinking about our needs before we're thinking about the needs of the UI folks. And what this does is because we have the content being defined separately from where the UI is being defined, we can independently be working on our work. The UI folks can be thinking about generally how they might want to present things in an abstract way. The content folks can be thinking about what messages and information need to be communicated. And then after some work has been done, there gets to be a discussion where you start mapping the content model with the layout and the presentation and the different UI components. And doing this actually accelerates the whole process. And it allows both groups to be working concurrently rather than as in a waterfall way where you're waiting on the UI design before you can decide the content. So that's a win-win for everyone. And also, I think it gives a lot more flexibility. So because you're doing this mapping, but you're not trying to centrally manage both the UI and the content in one place, you have flexibility. So if the UI changes a little bit, the UI folks have the ability to do that. And they will like that because it's often the case that when you make a UI change after you've tightly built the content around that, it breaks the content, and then you have to go back and change the content, right? No one finds that a very appealing scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. I'm experiencing that in my current role. Cruce, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's right on. Yeah, it's I think faster, cheaper, better is kind of the one of the ways to help people understand and usually putting numbers around it. Benchmarking is always a good way to justify those claims.
Yeah, absolutely. Switching over a little bit to the technical side, let's see. The question is, how do you help development teams move in this direction? So they know how to do UI strings and externalize them in resource files that enable localization, but do they need to learn a new way to develop, or do we need a bridge from the CMS to their app code?
That's a good question, and it's a little hard to answer in a very generic way because I think different development teams have different approaches to how they code UIs and things like that. So we can look at some common approaches. So one is you have a UI team that is maybe coding the UI and hard coding that content in the UI. That's not uncommon even today. It's not really, in my mind, the best practice, but the presumption is among a lot of developers, just tell me what the button text needs to say. We will put that in a button tag in HTML. We'll just write it in there and push it into GitHub, and there that text lives. And then you want to go back and revise that. Someone's going to do some crazy kind of search to try to find and replace that button text within those button tags. I mean, that's not a great way to do things. Other folks, I mean, I think the question kind of maybe alluded to, keys. Developers sometimes just come up with their own set of keys that make sense to them in the context of what they're delivering at the time. But you talk to developers and, they will tell you that they have nightmares about inheriting someone else's code with their own idiosyncratic keys because they haven't defined this stuff semantically, right? And so the whole idea behind having clear field labels that express the intention of the information and the message is that you are being very deliberate in how you're labeling these things. And you're getting very specific and you're breaking down if this is, you're not just saying primary action. You're not just saying something generic like that, or, button 1, button 2. However the key is written, you're getting very specific and you're sort of saying, all right, this is the such and such variation of this broader branch here. And good developers, when they have the time and motivation, often are able to come up with wonderful keys. So I'm not going to say that developers aren't able to do this, but they'll often default to what's easiest to do to meet the need at the time. And that, though, isn't sustainable. It just doesn't work over the long term.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you.
Yep, thumbs up.
I think another question, a couple of other questions that come up for folks. There is often overlap with the concept of OOUX, or object-oriented user experience. And I think there's a question in here from some folks about whether you, Michael, and Cruce have kind of explored that a little bit, and what's the relationship to kind of what you've been thinking about?
Yeah, I can start that out, and then Michael can add some color. We've had a colleague that we worked with has been OOUX certified, and we found that it is very, very good as a kind of taxonomy of UI concepts and a methodology that helps to step into more of a modular, reusable mindset when it comes to UI design, but it doesn't deal with the semantic content modeling at an independent and abstract level. So the content model that we've talked about within the tokenized approach, which is true like object orientation, we haven't seen that map well into OOUX. It's sort of like they're separate worlds where it's either OOUX or so we'd like to see that come together and there be more of an interoperability between OOUX thinking and true semantic content models, so that they work together. But it is for folks looking for a UI methodology. There's some really, really good things there from what we've experienced.
Awesome. Thank you. Another question that comes up for folks is the question of implementation in an agency setting. How do you start to bring these concepts into an agency setting when there's kind of a fundamental difference between how the products are built and delivered? What are your thoughts on delivering sort of some of these content modeling and content structure concepts into agency work?
That's, yeah, just one little start to that, which is that's why we're big fans of portable things like spreadsheets that can be provided to the agency with the idea that, okay, we're going to be collaborating in a way that is both creative and structured. And so the enterprise has the responsibility of saying, look, we've got to get all this stuff to work together. So we want all the creative input, and we want to be able to do that in a way that is going to be able to be extensible. We were working with one client that had thousands of agencies of record and in pharmaceuticals. And so for every product in every market, they had a separate agency of record, and all the formats were totally different. So we worked on basically a content acquisition approach that was systematic across one content model for everybody, so that the agencies can paint outside the lines and design to their heart's content, but they're operating at least with a set of standardized content elements that each of the brand managers were responsible for carrying into that agency relationship. So that required a lot of education and internal marketing, but it was ultimately very successful at saving thousands of hours and millions of dollars in streamlining content acquisition across a giant enterprise. Because if you're having to transform content separately from every agency, even one agency, it gets to be very, very heavy. So this is where tooling and system-based thinking really adds efficiency to your content supply chain.
Yeah, I would, those are really good points. And I'd also add that if you're working with an agency supporting a client, one of the realities is that you don't control everything, right? You're just working on a piece of something for often for a limited time duration. So what you can do though is understand where your client is, that they're going to keep evolving whatever it is you hand over. And so obviously the client wants to have something that's finished and it looks like it's done and dusted, but if you can step back and sort of explain how you've constructed it structurally, and what the thinking was behind the pieces of it. And I'm doing this right now with a project I'm working on, and explain that to the client and let them know that they're going to need to keep working on this, because obviously projects keep evolving over time. But set your client up for success by explaining the structure and the benefits of using it.
Yeah, well said. That was kind of the major question buckets. There was also a lot of really awesome conversation in the chat. Thank you all for participating and speaking with each other.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really been great to have a chance to present to all of you, and I appreciate the interest.
Yeah, thanks so much, Michael and Cruce. And I happen to be on the East Coast tonight instead of in Seattle, so as are Michael and Cruce tonight. So it's 10:30 p.m. So I think thank you guys for staying up late with me and with our folks. Everyone who's joined us, we appreciate all the great conversation, all the great sharing of resources, and sounds like maybe we have a follow-on event at some point to talk about OOUX and IA, but perhaps that's a topic for 2024. So for now, we thank our presenters and thank everyone for joining us. This was an incredible conversation, and I'm sure you're all leaving, as I am, with many things to think about and read and follow up on. So
greatly inspired.
Awesome event, and I'm thrilled that we're wrapping up our amazing year at Content Strategy Seattle with such a powerful event. So thanks again, you guys, and everyone for joining us. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone.
Night, everybody. Happy holidays.
You.